On the day the Liu family went bankrupt, everyone thought I would break off the engagement with him. In the heavy rain, I dropped the umbrella in my hand and helped the disheveled Charles into the car. "Give you 100 million, if you succeed, you come back to marry me, if you fail, I will go marry you." 5 years later, Charles returned with 3 publicly listed companies. Announced in front of all the media, "Mia and I have been broken off our engagement for 5 years. For the past 5 years, there has been another woman who has been by his side. When he's tired, give him a shoulder to lean on, when he's sad, offer him comfort, when he succeeds, applaud him." They support each other through thick and thin, they share joys and sorrows, and they are mutually in love. The woman who spent 100 million to help him make a comeback back then has now become a joke. This is 300 million, which can be considered as repaying the kindness from back then. After achieving success, Charles shed the restlessness of his youth and became mature and steady, with a compelling sharpness. At that time, I was deceived by his appearance and desperately begged my dad to help him one more time. Just looking at him again, I still felt a surge of possessiveness towards the man in front of me. So cheap. I picked up the card and handed it to the secretary behind me. I looked at the person opposite me with a blank expression and said coldly, "Go check it, not a single point can be missing." Charles watched as the secretary took the card, letting out a long sigh of relief. I admired the freshly done manicure and casually asked, "Do you think this means you don't owe me anything anymore?" Hearing this, Charles straightened his back and said solemnly, "If Miss Mia needs anything in the future, feel free to come to me, Charles will definitely be at your service." He then added, "Except for marriage." He spoke very seriously, looking like someone who values emotions and loyalty. But I seemed to be unappreciative. "The pair of jade earrings you bought at the auction yesterday, I like them too. Remember to bring them over tomorrow morning." The jade earrings that Charles splurged on are said to be a gift for his fiancée Rebecca. If it appears in my ears, I wonder how some people would react. Seeing him hesitate, I got up and went upstairs, saying without looking back, "If General Manager Charles's words don't count, then just consider what I said earlier as a joke." The next day, the secretary placed the earrings on my dressing table. I held it up and examined it for a while. It was ice green and crystal clear, truly beautiful. For tonight's dinner, I'm wearing a classical cheapao, and these earrings are just right. Charles attended with his fiancée, while I was alone beside me. The murmurs in my ears grew louder, all discussing why the gift Charles gave to his fiancée was being worn by me. Charles's fiancée was also walking towards me with a beaming smile. "Miss Mia, Charles has explained to me that these earrings are his way of repaying your kindness." I raised my glass and took a small sip, turning around without intending to pay her any attention. An inconsiderate woman is not worth my energy. She is still not giving up and provocatively said in a frivolous tone, "Miss Mia must not know how to love anyone besides being rich, otherwise Charles wouldn't have chosen me." I glanced at the half-full glass of wine and felt it was not satisfying enough. So I picked up the cake on the table and smashed it down hard on that smug face. "Ah!" A gasp drew the attention of everyone present. Charles rushed over immediately, took out a handkerchief from his chest pocket, and helped Rebecca clean the cream off her face. "Why is Miss Mia making things difficult for my fiancé?" he questioned me in an unfriendly tone. I threw away the cake plate in my hand, brushed my hands off disdainfully, and said nonchalantly, "She ruined my mood for eating." Rebecca hid in Charles's arms, her eyes filled with tears, tightly leaning against his chest, like a delicate little white flower. "I just came over to tell Miss Mia that I don't mind her taking my earrings, as long as it makes her feel better, she can do whatever she wants." As soon as this was said, my arch-rival Chin Qian crossed her arms and protested, "Mia is bullying people again, relying on her family's wealth to snatch other people's things everywhere." Others also rushed in, all condemning me as an arrogant and overbearing young lady who looks down on everyone. I still curled my lips, maintaining a proper smile, and stared intently at Charles's dim and unclear eyes. A long time. "Let's go." Charles carefully helped Rebecca leave, watching their backs and feeling it was quite striking. We got engaged at 18, and although Charles was flamboyant at that time, he was actually reserved. On his fair face, a hint of youthful pink would appear because of my joke. I enjoy teasing him, that kind of affection a woman has for a man. On the day his family went bankrupt, he seemed to grow up overnight, his gaze more resolute, exuding a stubbornness that refused to give in. I know he will definitely succeed, but I forgot that after his success, he may not remember our marriage vow. Regret it? I never do things I regret. I can help him up, or I can let him fall back into the mire again. From then on, wherever Charles appeared, I would be present. Whatever piece of land he bid on, I would outbid him by double the price. I'll underbid him by half the price for whichever project he bids on. When it comes to money, he's far behind Charles. When I, Mia, was dominating in Yunqing, he was still struggling in a small place with just 100 million. Finally, Charles couldn't hold on any longer and came to apologize alone. He stood in front of me, neither servile nor overbearing. "Miss Mia, this won't do you any good. No matter how rich the Chu family is, they can't afford to lose like this." I realized he was teaching me how to do things. I glanced behind him, calmly withdrew my gaze, and asked, "Where is your fiancée? Isn't she coming to apologize to me?" His lips pressed into a straight line, his body slightly bent, his attitude sincere. "I apologize to you on her behalf for what happened that day, but it was Miss Mia who struck first. Regardless, both sides bear responsibility. This apology is better left unsaid." A smile tugged at the corners of my mouth as I sighed and said, "I admit I went a bit easy on her. You'd better keep her away from me. Next time I make a move, it won't be as simple as a piece of cake." Seeing that I was unyielding, Charles no longer compromised. With a dark face, he said, "Since Miss Mia is still unwilling to let go of my fiancé, then we have nothing to talk about. Let's meet in the business world from now on." I leaned back on the sofa, crossed my legs, and said arrogantly, "All right, let's not miss each other." After leaving me, Charles began to contact big shots in various industries to discuss cooperation. But in Yunqing, as long as I say a word, no one dares to cooperate with him again. Moreover, when the Liu family went bankrupt, it had far-reaching implications, and besides me, there were many others who did not want him to get back on his feet. I didn't expect Rebecca to be an internet celebrity with millions of fans. She posts videos online, denouncing the monopoly in my industry and deliberately targeting Charles. At the same time, she cries while recounting the difficulties of their entrepreneurial journey, evoking empathy from a lot of netizens. When the secretary showed me the video, I laughed without a care. He immediately took out his phone and called Charles. "Delete the video your fiancé posted within 2 minutes." Charles said on the phone, "What she said is all true." "Is it a fact?" I said in a very indifferent tone, "Are you sure you don't even want to keep your last bit of face?" Charles paused for a moment. "I will make her delete it. Only a few people in the circle know about the matter of me giving him 100 million. If it gets online, it will be embarrassing for him. He is a businessman, weighing the pros and cons, and his fiancée is nothing. Paul and I grew up together. The night I got engaged to Charles, he cried all night while holding the stone lion at the door. On the day the Liu family went bankrupt, he spent over 10 million again, setting off fireworks all night in Yunqing. He said, "I'm not doing it for you, I just can't stand that guy Charles." So the two of us were in cahoots, yet we both looked down on each other. That night, he invited me to the bar to relax and thoughtfully called 8 male models for me. All of them were double-door refrigerators. After a few cups of yellow wine, I completely revealed my true nature, with an older brother on the left and a younger brother on the right. How joyful it was. The door of the private room was opened by the waiter, and through my drunken haze, I seemed to see Charles's annoying face. "That's right, it's him. Who called him here to ruin the fun?" I asked unhappily. Paul kindly tugged at the hem of my skirt that was about to slip down to my thighs and proudly boasted, "It's me, just in time to pour the wine." I looked at Paul, who was being a sycophant, and didn't understand what he meant. Paul couldn't wait to shout at Charles, who was standing at the door as a doorman, "Can't you see? Hurry up and come over to pour the wine." He then said to me proudly, "He just happens to need something from my dad recently, so he doesn't dare to ignore my words." It turns out Paul wanted to humiliate Charles. Was it to vent his anger for me? I can barely understand it this way. While I was lost in thought, Charles had already picked up the bottle and was half kneeling in front of me, filling my glass with wine. Flexibility is the word that comes to my mind. The colorful, changing lights shone on his strong and handsome face, and the depths of his eyes, which showed no emotion, seemed to be devoid of desire or need. It's already like this, yet still pretending to be aloof. I deliberately knocked over the wine glass, and the wine just happened to spill on his clean, as-new white shirt. His slightly furrowed brows expressed his dissatisfaction at the moment. "Sorry, could you pour me another glass?" The hand holding the bottle was veined, the tightly clenched jaw trembled slightly, and every subtle change indicated his restraint. I picked up the refilled wine glass and took a sip of the strong liquor, which was a bit spicy. He grabbed his white collar and pulled hard, closing the distance between the two of them. So close, I could feel his warm breath spraying on my face. My face suddenly moved forward, and he instinctively turned his head to miss it. This action angered me, and I couldn't hold back, spraying a mouthful of wine right in his face. Water droplets slid down his sharply defined face, disappearing into the collar, full of desire. I picked up the tissue on the table, calmly wiped my mouth, and then threw it at his face. "Sorry, I couldn't help it." Charles suddenly stood up, and the bottle of wine in his hand was angrily thrown to the ground, the flying glass shards cutting my bare calf. "I've already paid you back. If you keep humiliating me like this, it's a bit too much." "Too much?" I looked at Paul. Paul immediately shook his head. How could it be excessive? If you hadn't been willing to help him back then, he wouldn't even know where to beg on which bridge now. I turned my gaze back to Charles. "Did you hear that? You owe me not just money, but also a favor." I lifted my injured leg, and the blood had already pooled into a line. "Lick it clean, or I'll make you carry it out of this door sideways." Paul let out a sound of disdain, his face full of disgust. "Aren't you worried about the dirt?" I rolled my eyes at him. "What do you know? Saliva can kill germs." Charles has already turned around and is ready to leave while the two of us are exchanging words. Paul's bodyguard stood in front of the door, clearly not wanting to let him leave so easily. A commotion outside the door, and Rebecca pushed the door open, just in time. She stood in front of Charles, looking like a hen protecting her chicks. "If you dare to lay a finger on Charles, I will make sure you regret it." Looking at this self-assured woman in front of me, who fears neither heaven nor earth, I laughed even louder. He stepped forward 2 steps to stand in front of her, reached out and lightly patted her face twice, and on the third time, his wrist was grabbed by Charles. "Mia, don't go too far," Charles warned, his eyes bursting with killing intent. I looked at Paul and innocently asked, "Is it too much?" Paul shook his head and said, "It's not too much. After all, she stole your man. So I am the victim. One is my fiancé, with whom I have not yet broken off the engagement, and the other is the fiancé mentioned by my fiancé. This relationship is as complicated as it can get. Charles, don't forget, our engagement hasn't been dissolved yet. Don't you think it's even more excessive for you to publicly claim that this woman is your fiancé?" Charles's eyes dimmed, and in a hoarse voice, he said, "Our engagement hasn't been valid for 5 years. He looked up at me and said, "You probably don't know, but when the Liu family went bankrupt back then, your dad was also involved." "I don't believe it. Then why does my dad still want to help you?" He lowered his head and chuckled lightly. "It's just a game of cat and mouse. You people from the Chu family are all the same. Aren't you also thinking about how to pull my dad into the mire? This person, could it be that he is the worm in my belly, knowing what I am thinking?" In the end, they still started fighting. I sat on the sofa, watching coldly. Watching Charles being knocked to the ground by the bodyguard, seeing blood flowing from the corner of his mouth, and looking at the hole in his forehead. Rebecca was protected under him, crying and begging for mercy. I hate weak and fragile women the most, and I dislike women who cry and whine even more. Charles was carried out horizontally, and Paul, with great kindness, had him sent to the hospital. As he was leaving, he looked over at me, our eyes met, and I suddenly felt a rush of emotions. The shattered feeling in the eyes, the messy broken hair, the hint of a blood-stained wicked smile at the corner of the mouth, utterly enchanting. This reminds me of our senior year when we went to beat up the school bully together. I was cheering on the side, and he became more and more ruthless under the encouragement. At that moment, I thought to myself, this man is really wild, just my type. So many years have passed, his wildness has been deliberately hidden, and what remains is more of forbearance and restraint. I want to find the man who once made my heart flutter. I don't believe he has really disappeared. The youthful flutter of the heart is always accompanied by a strong sense of unwillingness. But this unwillingness turns into genuine anger a few days later. Charles stated in the interview, "My engagement with Miss Mia was dissolved 5 years ago. The reporter is waiting at my doorstep, wanting to hear my side of the story. My statement is, Charles took $1 billion from me to make a comeback, and then, he started chaos and abandoned it." Half an hour later, the news that Charles is a heartbreaker and Rebecca is the mistress hit the headlines. Rebecca posted the video of Charles getting injured online, saying that I have violent tendencies, that I am emotionally unstable, and that I have a mental illness. Later, I don't know where I got the diagnosis, which confirmed that I did indeed see a psychologist. The battle between Charles and me has just begun. I changed into a smart professional outfit and attended the company's new product launch with a smile. When faced with reporters' questions, do not mention matters of the heart and do not respond. Please pay more attention to our company's new products. Mr. Charles? Not very familiar. Miss Rebecca? Never heard of her. Everyone went from gossiping to looking confused, doubting that I have schizophrenia, and before it was a big deal, now it's not familiar? The more I do this, the higher the media attention will be. New products need to have some buzz to sell better. Now it's great, not only did I save on endorsement fees, but I also turned myself into a brand. In the VIP ward of the private hospital, Charles lay in bed with his head wrapped up, watching the news, while I quietly sat beside him peeling a small apple. I peeled it all in one go without breaking it, and it felt quite satisfying. I shoved the apple in front of Charles and said, "Eat it." Charles gently patted my head, his eyes filled with tenderness. "Go ahead and eat." "I won't eat it then." I withdrew my hand and took a big bite. It was both crispy and sweet, and quite delicious. At this moment, Rebecca's noisy voice came from outside the door. "Let me in, I want to see how Charles is doing." The bodyguard's deep voice, "Mr. Liu has instructed that no one is allowed to enter." Rebecca was dissatisfied. "Am I just anyone?" "I am his fiancée." The apple in her hand instantly lost its appeal, and she threw it into the trash can. I looked towards the door, regaining my usual indifference. "The person you're looking for, this is the role." Charles put down his phone, his expression, "I will handle it." The more I quarrel with Charles on the surface, the more those people will believe that he is truly isolated and helpless in Yunqing. The Liu family encountered trouble, which had far-reaching implications, and members of the Chu family were also involved. Charles, who ventured alone into the tiger's den, can be said to be taking a desperate gamble. He needs to find out the person who framed the Liu family back then, so he has to put himself in the trap set by the hunter, waiting for them to reveal their flaws and show themselves. I am from the Chu family, also his fiancée, and the one who will help him make a comeback. Only as his enemy can I be the greatest protection for myself. On the day Charles was discharged from the hospital, reporters surrounded the hospital entrance, making it impossible to get through. "Excuse me, Mr. Liu, was your injury caused by Miss Mia?" Rebecca stood by, indignant. "It was her who hired someone to do this. This woman is truly vicious." Charles smiled and said nothing, tacitly agreeing with Rebecca's statement. A black Cayenne is parked in the distance, and I am sitting in the car watching this scene. Suddenly, the phone rings. My father wants me to attend the internal meetings of several families, scheduled for tonight. I usually don't have the opportunity to attend such occasions, but today I'm being allowed to go mainly because I had a serious argument with Charles. Tonight's theme is to discuss how to deal with Charles and make him leave Yunqing. The main figures of the three prominent families, the Chu family, the Jing family, and the Chen family, have all arrived, and among the younger generation, there are only Paul and me. It seems that the matters of the Liu family are indeed not simple. Throughout the process, I kept my head down and didn't say a word. After finishing, my father suddenly asked me, "Mia, what do you think?" Just now, my father said to use the engagement to pressure Charles, and it would be best to marry him to bind our interests. He never believed in the sincerity of the cooperation between the Jing family and the Chen family, nor did he believe that Charles would spare the Chu family out of past feelings. He only believed in the interests right in front of him. I still didn't have the ability to resist his orders, so I could only comply and agree for now. Turn to Charles and message him, telling him that when there is no other choice, he can agree to it first. Father invited Charles to the Chu family's old house to reminisce. Even if it was a banquet with hidden dangers, he still had to come. One cannot catch tiger cubs without entering the tiger's den. I sat aside, listening to my father threaten Charles to marry me. As a party involved, I have no say. Charles was very firm, "I will not marry Mia." Knowing it was just a game, I still felt a strange dullness in my heart when I heard this sentence, as if his words came from the heart. The man in front of me is cold and noble, with a proud demeanor, standing before my father without being servile or arrogant. If we probably really won't get married. With a glance from his father, 8 bodyguards surrounded him, each one a skilled fighter. It seems that he can't handle the soft approach and wants to take a hard one. I couldn't help but feel nervous, and my delicate fists quietly clenched. With both fists, it's hard to fight against 4 hands. After a few moves, Charles was pressed to the ground. The father looked at him on the ground with a piercing gaze, exuding an air of authority that brooked no resistance. "Close it first, and tell me when he changes his mind." After hearing the order, the bodyguard escorted Charles to the secret room on the 2nd floor. Watching them go upstairs, the heavy iron door slammed shut with a bang, jolting my memories back to childhood. My mother was beaten to death behind this door, and I was also locked inside for 3 days and 3 nights. My mother talked a bit more with the driver at home, and I missed the curfew time because I was explaining a problem to a male classmate. My father's controlling nature is unusually strong, and for so many years I have been trying to find a way to break free from him. As Charles said, my father gave me 100 million back then, not because my coquetry had any effect. But to satisfy his sadistic pleasure, he enjoyed toying with others, watching a person rise and fall in the mire. The more others struggled, the happier he became. At midnight, I took the key I had secretly prepared in advance and released the battered Charles. I thought they would take action, but when I really saw all those whip marks, I couldn't help but shed tears. "Don't cry." Charles gently cupped my face and kissed my tears. I choked and said, "I'm sorry, after all these years, I still haven't made any progress." His pupils constricted, full of heartache. "You've already done enough for me." I shook my head, indicating it wasn't enough. Taking advantage of the night, I left through the back door with Charles. At the last moment, we were still discovered by my father's men. In a fit of rage, my father pulled the trigger from the 2nd floor. After the gunshot, I slowly lay down behind Charles. "Run!" I shouted with all my might. Charles glanced back, hesitated for a moment, and was about to turn back. "He is my biological father, he won't do anything to me." Charles believed this and got into the car that had been prepared at the door. That car wasn't arranged by me, it flashed by, and I clearly saw that the driver was Rebecca. I lowered my head and smiled bitterly. It was my own delusion. Even if I didn't save him, someone else would. He had already arranged everything, but he didn't tell me. Rebecca is not someone he hired to act, she is his accomplice, always has been. My father grabbed my jaw with such force that it felt like he could crush me. Our eyes met, and the anger in his gaze made my heart tremble. "Shut it," my father said, and I was locked in the secret room. He was holding a bloodied whip in his hand, slowly walking towards me. I was so scared that I kept retreating until there was nowhere left to go. "Father, I was wrong." I sobbed and begged for mercy. Later, my father grew tired, and the blood from the whip dripped endlessly. I lay on the ground, gasping for breath, with a bullet wound on my leg oozing blood. The pain on my body suddenly disappeared, as if time had returned to that spring of the year. The gentle breeze is neither proud nor impatient, the warm sun flows slowly, and the bright and clear youth stands under the shade of the tree. A shy girl is holding a love letter with a heart drawn on it. "Charles, I like you, please be my boyfriend." The boy named Charles was very rude. He raised his hand and threw the girl's love letter into the trash can. As an audience member, I stood aside, adjusting my hair that was blown out of place by the wind, laughing freely. The girl seemed to be insulted, angrily came over to argue with me, and even wanted to slap me. I dodged, and the girl fell to the ground like a dog eating shit. I laughed even louder. The girl named Chen Qian later became my arch-rival. Most of the rumors outside that are detrimental to me are largely due to her. I was stunned by Charles at first sight, and he might be looking at me like I'm a lunatic. Charles doesn't say much. As the only heir of the Liu family, he has received strict education since childhood. How to become a qualified leader is a lesson he must learn throughout his life. I am different. Under my father's brutal rule, I am full of rebellion. He has the ability and ambition, and I thought I would not be the closing loop of his life. It could also be the malicious female supporting character in his story, or perhaps just a dispensable NPC. But I am not willing to accept it. I always feel that I could also be the main character. My father still did not give up on me. He sent me to the hospital and provided me with the best treatment. Half a month later, I heard the news of my engagement on the hospital room's TV, and the man is Paul. The engagement banquet is just 3 days away, and I have a feeling he wants to force Charles to show up. In recent days, the Chen family and the Jing family have suffered consecutive blows, with heavy losses. Charles's methods made this middle-aged man restless. The ward door was pushed open, and the father walked in with a bodyguard. Just a glance, and my body couldn't help but tremble, my thoughts returning to that cruel and bloody night. My father stood in front of the hospital bed, looking down at me with disdain. "When did you start collaborating with Charles?" "We did not cooperate." I lowered my head and denied it. The father said coldly, "If you want to live, just be obedient. For the engagement party in 3 days, do whatever it takes to get Charles to attend." He wanted to speak but stopped, yet I had already heard the sound of the whip sinking into flesh. "Okay." My teeth were chattering. The phone was back in my hands, and I looked at a string of numbers on it back and forth several times. Finally, the fingers flew, and a message was sent out. Looking at the white wall above, a white light flashed through my mind, and I surprisingly began to let go. Born into such a family, with such a father, I can save one if I can. What more can I ask for in return? Perhaps I was born to repay the Chu family's debts. 3 days passed in a flash, and the scars on my body disappeared, my fair skin returned to its original state. A high-waisted long dress, chestnut wavy long hair cascading down my back, a thick layer of blush covering my pale face, and my complexion looks fairly good. At the engagement banquet where celebrities gather, everyone has a solemn expression, and the area outside is already filled with a web of traps. My father has also been secretly watching me. It's not that I haven't noticed, but I don't care at all. As the daughter of the Chu family, she moved among the guests, gracefully toasting with a proper smile. The father went from calm and composed to frowning and anxious. The person he was waiting for never showed up. Seeing me calm and composed, my father seemed to understand something and pulled me into the VIP room. "Where is he? Why hasn't he come yet?" he asked impatiently. I raised my head and bravely looked him in the eye, no longer afraid. "He shouldn't be coming back, right?" That day I threatened Charles in the message, saying that if he dared to come, I would jump straight down from the upstairs. Father glanced at the bodyguard beside him, and the bodyguard understood, pulling out his belt and handing it to him. No matter how scared I am, I still don't hide the smile at the corners of my mouth and use words to provoke him. You'd better kill me like you killed your mother. He paused, squeezing out a sentence from between his teeth. Your mother should die. The belt was raised high, and just at the moment it was about to fall, a sudden siren sounded outside the door. Immediately after, Charles burst in, and the armed police rushed in with their guns drawn. My father and the bodyguard were restrained, and I curled up in the corner, staring blankly at everything in front of me. Charles didn't tell me. Distrust? Or never trusted? Mia, are you okay? The man in front of me spoke urgently, his eyes filled with concern, gently picking me up. I blankly buried my head in his chest, not wanting to speak, not wanting to respond, as if I had been abandoned by the whole world. The repeated distrust has shaken my trust in him as well. Am I just a pawn in your plan? My voice buzzed out from his embrace. Charles paused at his feet and leaned down to nuzzle my forehead. When you have rested, I will explain it to you. Closing my eyes, the tip of my nose is filled with the fragrance of gardenias. He used to smell of sandalwood, which may not need any explanation now. The crimes of the three families of Chu, Chen, and Jing were simultaneously made public, with irrefutable evidence. Just like the Liu family back then, they all disappeared overnight. Charles's methods are ruthless. I hid at home for a few days, and Charles waited outside the door for a few days. The servants at home have all been dismissed, and the food in the refrigerator is almost eaten up. I took a shower, put on some makeup, and changed into a different outfit. I always want to look more presentable when I meet my ex. A tall figure was reflected in the glass window, and I sat opposite him, no longer as arrogant as before. I can't help but express, congratulations, you have gotten what you wished for. Also, I heard you are getting engaged, but I have nothing now. I pushed the pair of jade earrings I had snatched earlier in front of him. This can be my gift, I won't be going to the wedding. Charles stood up excitedly, his eyes slightly red. Mia, let me explain, I owe Rebecca too much. She has suffered a lot following me all these years. I lowered my eyes and smiled bitterly. Yes, while you were suffering, I was living a life of luxury as the young lady of the Chu family. What he didn't know was that during that time, I couldn't sleep for whole nights, because of guilt. The thought that my father caused his family to be ruined makes me feel like a murderer as well, and the endless guilt drives me to madness. The examination form that Rebecca revealed for seeing a psychologist is real. I went to see him on the day my mother died. He is celebrating the listing of the first company with the employees, and Rebecca stands beside him, like a perfect couple. After returning home, I went crazy and smashed everything in the room. Even so, I never thought of making things difficult for him. Charles frowned slightly, and every word he spoke was very serious. I will compensate you, you can have whatever you want. Except for marriage. I coldly interrupted him, saying this on his behalf. I got up and took the most expensive bottle of wine from the cabinet, opened it, and poured 2 glasses. It's been almost 10 years, let's settle this tonight, and we won't owe each other anything in the future. Charles took the wine and drank it all in one go. He snatched the bottle of wine from my hand and downed 2 glasses in a row. I chuckled, this wine is really expensive, your way of drinking is such a waste. The light in his eyes flickered and passed, calm and unperturbed, with no desires or demands. He raised his glass and said, Mia, in this life, I owe you, I will definitely repay you in the next life. I was speechless. How can you be sure that in the next life, I will still love you? He forced a smile, awkwardly pulling up the corners of his mouth. I'm sorry to say, I was being too demanding. I raised my chin proudly. A woman as good as me, you are not worthy of. A bottle of wine slowly runs out, followed by the second bottle, the third bottle. We move from in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, to the sofa, and then to the bedroom. The results of a hangover include not only a headache but also memory loss. Clothes scattered all over the floor, messy sheets, and fallen wine bottles. Is it an uncontrollable emotion, or is it drunken debauchery? I glanced at Charles, who was still in a deep sleep, and couldn't find the answer. I randomly changed into a set of clothes and quietly went out. I didn't have time to tidy up my messy hair and tired face, so I took a taxi to the airport. A plane ticket to country H. When sitting on the plane, looking at the white clouds passing by outside, I finally felt a bit of reassurance. I escaped, becoming a deserter in love. 5 years have turned me into a woman who is more restrained, patient, and calm than before. The man's gaze was deep and penetrating as he stared at me, my mind buzzed, and my heart raced wildly. The calm that I took pride in has vanished at this moment of reunion. It turns out that a person's heart can really only beat for one person. Dear, do you know them? At the entrance of the coffee shop, my friend Pick tugged at the corner of my clothes and followed my gaze. Charles's black eyes were cold and emotionless, but one could faintly sense a hint of anger. I don't understand, what's he so angry about? I turned my head and said, I don't know him. Turning back, Charles was already in front of me. Let's talk. His cold voice revealed no trace of warmth. He grabbed my wrist, domineeringly trying to take me away. Pick wanted to stop him, but I halted his steps with a glance. Under the parasol tree, standing opposite each other. Charles's voice was a bit hoarse. Have you been well these years? I'm fine. I replied to him calmly. I miss you very much. With a tremor of my fingertips, I pressed my lips together, feeling a bit dry. Thank you for remembering me, but... I chuckled softly, I'm getting married. I extended the ring on my hand to prove that what I said was true. Charles momentarily lost his train of thought, his mouth opening and closing, and finally said, I wish you happiness. I slightly curled my thin lips and said cheerfully, my fiancé is still waiting for me, so I'll head back first. As I spoke, I turned to leave. My arm was tightly held, and then with a force, I fell into a warm embrace. Charles's bony fingers slipped into her hair from behind her ear, and a pair of cold lips kissed her. I instinctively pushed, but couldn't open it, and in a fit of anger, I swung my hand and hit. With a crisp sound, it stopped his movement. My expression changed slightly, and I couldn't help but feel angry. Don't bother me anymore. He is engaged to Rebecca, and even though he is not in the country, I still heard the news. Charles's low, hoarse voice was mixed with bitterness. I'm sorry, I miss you so much, I think about you all the time. I looked helpless. You are already engaged, so you have to be responsible for your fiancé. Thinking about another woman like this, in the end, you will let down everyone. Charles's eyes were red, tightly holding my waist. Mia, I broke off the engagement with Rebecca, can we get back together? I trembled all over, and a voice was telling me, agree to him. But reason overcame emotion. I'm sorry, I love my fiancé very much. Then what about our son? He was a bit agitated, staring at me intently with his eyes. My hands, hanging nervously at my sides, clenched into fists, and I lowered my head to look at my toes, unsure of how to respond. From knowing of this child's existence, to giving birth to him, and now he is 4 years old. I never thought about what I would do if Charles knew of his existence. But now this problem is right in front of me, and I have to make a decision. If you really care about the child, then don't disturb my life anymore. I beg you. The last 2 words were humble to the point of being dust. At first, I just wanted him to succeed, and now he has not only succeeded but also stands in the most dazzling position. I am glad that he has achieved what he has today. After all, it proves that my bet was right, doesn't it? I broke free from his shackles again and turned to leave. The leaves of the phoenix tree swayed in the wind, highlighting the desolation of late autumn. 5 years and another 5 years, a missed opportunity is just a missed opportunity. 3 years ago, my father committed suicide in prison, and at that time I knew I could never go back. How could Charles forget the tragic scene of his parents dying in a car accident? The best ending is for each to live well for the rest of their lives. Epilogue: the name Mia is the pain of Charles's life. They are kindred spirits, both products of sacrifices in their families. The difference is that he has the choice, but Mia does not. Fortunately, their engagement is a joy for both of them. The joy at the beginning was matched by the sadness at the end. He cannot forget the scene of his parents' tragic death. In the rest of his life, there is only revenge. When Mia was willing to give him $100 million to start over, he accepted without hesitation, because this was what the Chu family owed him. Rebecca has been a tool cultivated by Charles from beginning to end, used to cover up his love for Mia and to embellish the non-existent balance. There is no balance in his heart, it has always leaned towards one person. Some words cannot be spoken, but both understand in their hearts. What lies between the two is bloody human flesh. The winner is king, the loser is a bandit. Charles won, but he also lost. Every year he takes a month to see how that woman is doing. To see if his son has grown taller. Until his hair turns gray. On the day his son got married, he held the microphone and shouted at the person standing at the back, "Do you want me to make my mom wait until she's buried?"